KubeArmor, you talk about what is runtime security. I think this is a good thing that you did of like, what is runtime security? Can you talk about like the difference between, yeah, what is runtime? When people hear the word runtime, some people may not know what are maybe the three layers here, application, workload, and cloud. Mark or Scott?
Mark, did you want to take that? I'm sorry, my
Um,
voice is going. You can start it, Mark. I'll pick up.
Sorry, I had to look at something. What was the question? Where are we?
The runtime, like the definition of runtime, right? That we already talked about, when things, what is runtime? Like is when the application is at the time that it's running and it's running in production, right? That's the
Right.
runtime. But there's different layers. You have three main layers here that you split in this diagram. The first one.
Yeah. So I mean, if you think about it, your application is a container, right? It's a Linux process, collection of Linux processes, um, and you know, no matter how awesome Kubernetes is, at the end of the day, it's just a Linux process. And so all of the things that are, built into the way Linux runs things gives you the ability to have all these different hooks. Um, and so, one of the things that like I know personally when I first started getting into Kubernetes is like I kind of made some weird assumptions about what Kubernetes did, like especially around storage is the example I love to give is where, when I saw these different storage providers for like Amazon and Azure and NFS, I thought that like Kubernetes actually like hooked it up and talked all the protocols and whatever. And like I didn't really know how it worked, just worked, right? And then I worked on a project to do SMB or SIFs, Windows shares for Kubernetes. And I was like, it's just a file mount? Really? That's it? And like that was the
Yep.
first time where it really clicked in my mind. I was like, this is just a Linux process. I just gotta know Linux, right? Um, and the disconnects, especially between what a Linux identity is, what your process identity is, but what your API like those things are not the same. Um, yeah, you're really getting into the details of how processes run. Um, but that part was a real eye opener to me. It's like it's just a process.
So going with that, right? And I think that a lot of folks that are getting started in Kubernetes, I tend to do, and I bet you also do, is one of the areas that you go deep into is Linux, right? A lot of um, and it's getting Kubernetes have come up at that time also saying like, oh, how does this work? How Istio works, creates a configuration, and which is just Kubernetes. Like, what do you mean Kubernetes? A config map or secret? Like, there's no more, or a pod. That's the level, right? That becoming Kubernetes. But then when you have a container, then it's Linux. It's like when people ask like, how do I block a process from accessing a a network port? How do I block a process, a binary, right? It's a process, a PID from accessing a file. Well, how do I block it from like reading versus writing? Right? How do I say that this process can access capabilities, right? Can do file IO, but it cannot do network to create a NIC, for example, right? Um, and the answer is was just running in Linux. And for people that have a background in Linux, it's just Linux, right? For folks that are coming from the other side of the house of like business applications, containers, and now have to learn Kubernetes, they maybe have never touched Linux. So it depends where you're coming from in terms of knowledge. So Scott, can you tell us a little bit about KubeArmor in here in this diagram? Explain the different blocks. Like, what do they mean? Um,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
Go
definitely
ahead.
on that, Carlos. So I mean, I'm trying to figure out where to start from. But if I'm going at the bottom, let's just talk about that kernel layer, like you were talking about Linux, right? So there's our Linux layer, and some of the security you were talking about, like blocking a process, allowing a process, doing a port. Well, you can use LSMs, in Linux, right? So you got your Linux security modules. As you mentioned earlier, AppArmor being, common one talked about. But it's not the only one out there, right? SE Linux, and there's a couple others. They all write differently, though. So you write an LSM in AppArmor, it doesn't look the same as other ones. Plus, they can get very complex, right? If anybody's ever tried to write one. So, but you can use these to really get down to a minute level of runtime security. Like saying, let's face it, in a container, you've got a handful of processes on I'm going to say a well-written container. Why not tell Linux, or Kubernetes in this case, only these 5 processes can ever execute? You try to run something else, we're just not going to let it happen, right? So you really can lock down the container for that. Now, there is, we don't want to get into whole eBPF, right? I'm sure most people on this call have probably heard of it. That's a whole discussion by itself, right? There's some great books out there on that. But that's what everybody's really kind of the hook in now, because you can see basically everything, right, when you go through eBPF. So to make this easier to consume, and definitely to shift left, right? Big term we always hear, let's do some DevOps, make sure our developers can do what they need to lock down that application. Because somebody from my level that's doing the platform, I don't know all the apps, right? I just can't know all the apps. So we want to enable people to do the security. And that's where the security policies come in. And in KubeArmor's case, it's a KubeArmor policy. You can do it for the containers. You can also do a host policy, right? That's where like a network policy wouldn't help you much at all. So you might need to block something on the host side as well. But this is going to use one format using a KubeArmor policy. And what KubeArmor is going to do is convert that to the LSM. So what's great about this is you make this one policy, and you can deploy it everywhere that you have KubeArmor running. So if you got it in AWS, you got it in Azure, you got it in GCP, you've got it in Ali, you've got it in Oracle Cloud, whatever it is, it's the same policy, right? You don't have to try to do 10 different ones. They also include utilities to help you create them. So that's what this is kind of demonstrating here, is that you got KubeArmor running, and it'll interact with information coming from the kernel, so eBPF monitoring in this case, and you can then block or just alert or allow. So all of that is kind of where this is flowing.
So the aspect of this is the kernel. One thing that I'm a little bit lost in the BPF LSM, but the AppArmor and SE Linux is things that have existed for a while that I'm aware.
Yes.
That basically in AppArmor, right? In Linux, like we're just talking Linux, no Kubernetes at all. Like I can have a Linux machine. I configure it with AppArmor, so the kernel can do AppArmor things, and I put my policies, which has a syntax. We'll go over how that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
A syntax that is not like a normal like chmod, right? It's a syntax that you put, and you drop this in some etc/folder folder, and then get loaded when the machine boots, or you can load them. The other one, SE Linux, same thing. I put my configuration in some /var/etc folder, and then the Linux works with SE Linux. And then what is BPF LSM? Is that newer came with newer versions of Linux, or what is BPF LSM? That's what a little bit is that newer than the other two?
That's referring to just so in eBPF you get the virtual machine, or you want to call it a virtual module, how you're going to refer to that, and it's just saying that's another Linux security module, if that makes sense. Probably not the most complex answer I'm going to give you on that, Carlos. Unless Mark, you have something to add to that by chance, but
the thing that
I did different LSMs in general.
At the beginning of the chapter, maybe I need to read it again, but the thing that struck me then later in the chapter was KubeArmor is at the end of the day, is a Kubernetes controller CRD that you create Kubernetes CRs, YAML Kubernetes files, and they get translated, right, or transform, or it follows. You put a DSL of a policy, but they get down translated to just Linux, AppArmor, SE Linux, or BPF, right? That's the value. Is giving an abstraction
Yes.
on top of this Linux thing that existed for a while. And then KubeArmor is a Kubernetes controller. Like from the get-go, it wasn't clear until actually I saw a CR like, oh, this is just a CRD, KubeArmor. So there must be some KubeArmor pods running, reconciling the CRDs into some files or some changes in the cluster. But in this case, it's changing the node, right? The etc, the files in the node to be able to configure Linux, the kernel, right? To do that. I'll take a question from Alan. Go ahead, Alan. You have your hands raised. Alan Diaz, you have your hand raised for a
Hey,
question?
Carlos. Yeah, sorry, couldn't find the mute button. In Scott's explanation, it became clear. And apologies, I haven't read the chapter in advance as I wanted to. It sounds like there's a hard requirement or prereq of having an LSM installed to leverage KubeArmor, because it sounds like it translates the KubeArmor policy to an LSM policy. And so that's a hard dependency. And like, does KubeArmor help you kind of set that up to, like, at a minimum basic, this is what the LSM needs to be configured at so that KubeArmor can manage, or you just have to manage separately
That's a
and
good,
hand it off to KubeArmor?
that's a good question. Yeah, it doesn't do it itself. And actually, I kind of ran into that with the Kind version that we were using. So if you look at the scripts for the chapter, the first thing we actually do is we exec into the Docker container that's running the control plane and the node, and we actually do a install of AppArmor. So it actually wasn't in there. So what would happen is you could try to deploy KubeArmor, you just would get errors because it couldn't connect to. Now, most Linux do enable an LSM by default, right? But of course, doesn't mean they have to. So that is a hard prereq, yes, because what it's going to do, and I hate to say just, right, but it's going to convert those to that LSM.
Yeah. No,
So
that's
you
huge.
have to, the requirement is you have to have a machine, a node, right? Your Kubernetes node. So if it's from a Kubernetes cloud provider or just Linux in your house, right? That Linux needs to have a certain level of kernel level, even, right? Do we need kernel 5 or kernel 6 or a certain kernel 5 level?
I think each version will document that, Carlos, but it has to be an eBPF based kernel, right? Which is pretty common now for the last, probably 4 or 5 years, roughly.
Yep.
So as long as that, now there could be some, if you get a super old kernel and you're going to try to use the newest release, there could be an incompatibility. But myself, I have not run into it, and it has a wide range of support, even Bottle Rocket on AWS. So it is tested a lot. And if you happen to run into some flavor of, a host OS node that doesn't work, and you just put it in the issues forum, they are incredibly responsive at adding
the support.
Yeah, they're very, very quick about it. During Kind, I did have some of these issues, and it's not Kind's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just the way Kind runs with the AppArmor and it's in container. Yeah, so I had to jump through a lot of hoops to make things work. That wouldn't happen in the real world. It's just the whole nesting game on how it had to be done. And it's a known issue, actually. If you go into the Kind, they'll even tell you AppArmor has some issues. Yeah, but works great for what we're doing. But I do call it out in the scripts for anybody that's going to look at them. I'll say, look, we're doing an unconfined here because we have no choice.
I saw it.
Yeah,
even for Calico, right, to be able to run on unconfined, so I can do the capabilities of networking.
Yes, and a lot of it had to do with just the nesting, right? If we were to do a real live Kubernetes cluster, I'll say production ready, we wouldn't have to do that.
And you're installing things like AppArmor utils. And this is something that I think somebody's typing.
My bad.
Friendly, either. Okay. I see Jack. Go ahead, Jack. Your question.
Oh, okay. So maybe you explained it and I missed it. So if I'm delivering a Helm chart to someone and I have some KubeArmor requirements, are those KubeArmor requirements built into my Helm chart, or does the operations person need to get notes from me on how to set up KubeArmor?
That's a good question. So
It's a persona thing. I think I'm familiar with SE Linux. I understand the principles, and we have that problem with SE Linux where delivering something we can't touch in our installation or YAMLs the SE Linux. Someone else has to. And I was
Yep.
wondering how KubeArmor manages the different personas involved with putting things on clusters.
well, and that's the one great thing about KubeArmor being that abstraction layer, I'm going to call it, Jack, that you don't have to be like an admin on Linux, for an example. But you're absolutely right. So you're saying you get some kind of a deployment application, right, in Helm from a vendor, for an example, and you want to have a KubeArmor policy that maybe locks that.
Oh no,
Yep.
they gave me requirements to change my KubeArmor infrastructure. I've got everything all locked down, and they want me to change it. And so are there KubeArmor directives inside their Helm that I have to allow, or do I have a separate step where I have to tweak my KubeArmor infrastructure?
Well, so the term KubeArmor infrastructure, I'm trying to wrap around.
Well,
Right?
I see a box. Remember, my mental model of how this works is like SE Linux, right? So I'm just learning about it right now, and I was wondering if this is a well-established practice on how KubeArmor is being managed. Which persona manages it in the Kubernetes workflow?
So
Go ahead.
yeah, I can try to help Jack, but I think that's we'll talk about what KubeArmor is here. I think that what you're referring to, just to continue, is the way of like KubeArmor. You have it'll be similar to, I want to say Kubernetes, but it's policies, right? That
Mhm.
people, the Kubernetes administrators that own that cluster, that own those nodes, they decide that they want to use KubeArmor to secure those Linux machines, and they want to have policies to secure the software. So what I can see is asking a vendor, like if I have a company, am I using KubeArmor? Like the vendor should not be forcing me to use KubeArmor, right? I have KubeArmor, but I'm going to run this software that is Jack's super high performance AI container, right?
Right.
I will say, hey Jack, I'll pay you $1 more if you, in your Helm chart, you have a boolean that says, hey, when I install Jack's Helm chart, I put KubeArmor policies true. Then your Helm chart will spit out, 2 or 3 KubeArmor policies that refer to your application in the with the minimum access that your binary needs to work.
Mhm.
And the files that that makes sense.
Oh yeah. I was just wondering what I'm looking for is best practices or well-established. Here's how people handle this.
I mean, we'll do it from two levels, myself, too. So we'll have some cluster-wide things, right, that are just going to be dictated that, okay, you have no choice.
And the software doesn't run, right?
Right. Yeah. But what we'll do then is it's a CRD, right? So we use that permission at the cluster level, aggregate it over to admin, do that as a namespace admin, which allows then the developers to create their own. We typically try not to get involved much in that portion with the app because you get a lot running, right? You can imagine getting into 200,000 different pods to do this. And then, I mean, to be perfect, like Carlos said, if a vendor could say, cool, we know we run these 3 processes, we're going to give you a completely locked down KubeArmor policy that says no other process can run except these 3. So it's kind of a hybrid, is what I'm going to tell you. And I'm a fan of giving developers the power, right, to do what they need. Whether it's going to be they're going to lock down network ports, right? They know the app the best. And there are some observability tools that come in KubeArmor that you can actually get like kind of a old school ASCII look where it's telling you what's running, and you can figure out what ports you need to close, what processes. It's really cool with that. There used to be another project that auto created all of that too, but it wasn't actually an open source, so it's no longer in the product. But definitely, I'm very passionate of runtime security. So if you want to discuss this afterwards, Jack, at some point, by all means, but love to discuss it. So
Yeah, that would be great. So in terms of KubeArmor, you have the enforcements, right? That KubeArmor will have policies to configure AppArmor and SE Linux, and those are things like you will say they're not. Let me see how I explain it. they're not alarms. Like I usually call the eBPF is like when alarms came in, like Falco, for example. Somebody was asking about Falco, like through eBPF hooks, you can get the first thing that you can do is like you have here of like, I want to be triggered. Like tell me when this happens. Just tell me, and then I can log it. I think you have an example here of a lock and a camera at the door, where the camera is kind of like the eBPF, right? Of the camera saying, "Hey, I inform me that somebody was trying to access /etc/password," right?
Mhm.
Just inform me, because we don't know who it is, right? In security, it could be we don't know who it is, but we want to catch them, right? And we don't want to block them, but we want to catch them to see if they get that. Then what do they do with that? Do they send it somewhere? And maybe that's what we want to catch. We don't want to catch the fact that they read Etsy password. We want to catch the fact that they, after they did it, they connected to this IP address and we know where they live, right? He lives in here, Carlos' house, trying to hack people's computers, right? So that's the aspect of like audit or being informed. And eBPF is the one that gives you that. AppArmor and SE Linux, from I understand, right? These technologies from the past that I used to work with, it's just I know I want to enforce, and that's it. Like, do they also log? The kernel is able to log AppArmor and SE Linux.
Yes. So when you say logging
But
it in,
then
I'm sorry, go ahead.
it will go to system D message kernel standard logging, right?
So KubeArmor, of course, does standard out in all of their logs. They also do have an extra logging ability as well too. So
The
KubeArmor,
AppArmor can detect the logs from AppArmor and SE Linux up.
no, so KubeArmor has its own logging, and then SE
So
Linux would have its.
if somebody tries to bypass a policy from AppArmor that got configured in KubeArmor, does KubeArmor has a log of that? Can do they notify?
I'm trying to follow your flow on that, Carlos. So they,
AppArmor, like for example,
so you got
AppArmor
an app,
policy,
and that
and
AppArmor
somebody tries
policy
to
was
access a
created by itself.
file. Yeah, the policy was created by KubeArmor.
Okay, created by KubeArmor. Okay.
Does KubeArmor has logs, like can catch that log?
So how would you? I'm trying to figure out. So eBPF will trigger it, right? So I don't know.
eBPF. I think that was the
Yes,
answer I was looking for, right?
yes.
That's
I'm just
that's why
thinking.
eBPF comes into the picture. Just
Yes,
want to
yes,
illustrate that when it's around observability, eBPF is the one that comes in
yes.
play,
So it's
right?
not that it sees the AppArmor log as per se, right? But that eBPF event
The
is going
hook,
to be
the
triggered.
event, and then that
Yes,
became a log event that for KubeArmor.
yes.
Okay. So this is the section that Alan we were discussing about the requirements to have deploy KubeArmor. So KubeArmor is deployed. I think I saw it's a CLI at some point. I think later it's mentioned. So it could be a KubeArmor CLI command and also a Helm chart. I'm guessing a Helm chart
Yes.
because I work with a lot of environments that we use GitOps,
Yeah,
and it can be
absolutely.
deployed as a Helm chart.
Yes, yeah, that's the better one to do, Carlos. We didn't for the chapter just because this made it really quick and easy. So you can
Yeah, yeah,
use
yeah.
KArmor in it, and it'll just go and deploy. But yeah, you're
And
definitely going to want to do it.
what are the things that run in the cluster after that? I see a controller, which is for this CR reconciliation. I'm guessing to handle those CRs policies.
Mhm.
What are the a daemon, an agent? That's the daemon set.
Yep, yep. So you'll
Um,
see two of
and
those. One.
then
Yep.
this relay, what is it? Is that the snitch or relay? At the top is a snitch and then relay. Is that the login system or the one capturing the events and then sending it somewhere outside the cluster?
Yeah. So that's actually what does the monitoring and the management of the events. So it's the relay function to allow centralizing the events. I mean, in our example here, we only got 2 nodes, right? So it handles
Yeah.
Event forwarding as well. Yeah, essentially with that, you get your logging and tracking.
So the agents in the daemon set are aware of this relay, and they're like they know they'll be the ones communicating to that relay, the one pod or the deployment.
Yes, so you're talking about like at the logging event. So if you were on, I don't know, the control plane node or you're on the worker node and something triggers, yeah, the relay is what's going to be used to aggregate the logs for that.
Okay. So the agent monitors and sends the information to the relay.
Mhm.
So that's it. Like basically three components, two deployments and one daemon set.
Yeah, you'll see one other one, and I think that was snitched. That's part of the Helm. So that just adds another component. It doesn't really change what's going on, but I do call it out
Okay.
in the chapter somewhere about that, just so people know when they deploy it in Helm, they're like, hey, what's this extra one?
And what is niche?
That one, I'd have to actually look it up because I don't use it a lot that way.
Okay.
So I have to admit you got me on that one.
Okay. Good. Good. We can dig later. Um, and this is the information that the daemon sets will have of like how to well, this is the relay, right? The relay is the basic information that the relay do is just logs, log standard output, standard error, all the
Yes,
things
you're
that it's
setting up the
finding,
values in there. Yep.
and then this is what it would look like.
Yeah, I trying to show an example of an event. So of course
And
you have
basically
anything like Splunk running, it'll pull it into your
yeah,
logs for you.
or Grafana, what is it, Grafana Loki, is it Loki in Grafana, right? But it's JSON log lines, right? So this will be
Yes.
your system to but this is logs. Is there a way for KubeArmor to send something to somewhere like an event, like a webhook or something?
I haven't seen that. So something almost like the Falco
Yeah, that's what
sidekick,
I was
right?
trying to compare
The
to.
sidekick
I
goes
think
over.
Alan was asking how this compares to. Do you know how this compares to Falco, like KubeArmor, or what's the overlap of the functionality? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I definitely do because our first and second editions had Falco. It was replaced by this, and not to be unfair to Falco at all, right? Great project. It's just we didn't have any more room.
Yep.
So what we wanted was something more that could do the actual inline blocking and mitigation of this, right? Because I know Falco's done a lot of progressing over the last say 2-3 years, right? They've added, of course, Sidekick was a great feature. They just did an event trigger. I haven't read about it much. I just was glancing at it. So they're definitely different systems. If you got into like a sysdig secure with Falco, because it comes with that, you can do a lot of this, but that's using an enterprise edition of a product.
I see.
So in this case, you can block is a thing. So with the full open source, you're going to be able to create the auditing, kind of like what Falco would give you. Now, of course, Falco also includes that huge rule set that you get right out of the box, which makes some friendlier looking, output, which is great. You're not going to quite
Yep.
get that here. Instead, you're going to get all the eBPF output of, yep, this was blocked or that wasn't. So they overlap a little. I think Falco, with all the extra stuff they've been adding, can do much of this, but they accomplish it differently. So you definitely couldn't say which one's better than the other as per se.
Understood. Understood. So going a little bit more
I'm sorry, Alan.
into this. Go ahead,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Carlos.
Alan.
You answered this in the chat, Scott.
Yeah.
But in an enterprise environment, you would recommend the Aquanox version or enterprise, I guess, supported to roll this out into a supported environment where we can get, that kind of support.
Yeah, there's
And
always that gray area, right, Alan, of do you go full
yeah,
open source or do you need a supported
right. Yeah,
version
yeah,
of
yeah.
stuff? So
I mean, given in the financial industry, I think I want to go supported. Do you know people using this in like production, full-fledged production environment?
I do. I know some very
Okay,
big places doing it too that I can't really mention
no,
too
that's cool.
publicly.
That's cool.
If you wanted to talk on the side, I can tell you a couple other things, obviously. But yeah, it's let's just say I have some of my vendors that I use products from that use it.
Got it.
That's just one example. I'm not like a selling a who or anything, right? But yeah, they've grown a lot. The full product obviously is KubeArmor is just part of it, right?
Yeah.
They donated it to CNCF a while ago. You get a UI and discovery tools and a lot of other things, right? So
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm showing here while I was reading, I was trying to search more about KubeArmor. What Alan was referring to the open source version. So I don't know if we mentioned it. Like KubeArmor is today a CNCF project. It's in Sandbox, and was able to find. I always look in the TOC CNCF GitHub if you want to know what's the latest with any CNCF project. That's my tip of like going to a TOC and find the documents. I was able to find that they apply in January for incubation.
incubator, yeah,
And it has a lot of those details. It has adopters section, right? It has who's adopting this in production, um, adopter sections, the maintainers, the development metrics, like the health of it, to evaluate it. So this is they also have put the dependencies, right? The things that depend on if you're doing pedigree license, for example, or security pedigree evaluations, right? Um, for those that work in the enterprise, um, you cannot run software, right? You just not get a binary from like an open source project and just run it in the enterprise, right? People will ask you like, what software is in there? And you're like, oh, it's just a KubeArmor. Like, no, let me ask again. What software is in there? It's KubeArmor. Like, let me ask you again. What software is in that? Oh, this list of all these Go code that continues to go and go and go and go. And this could be risk, right? All these things could, any of them can have a CVE at any time. And also, one of the things that and not this is included in the TLC of the CNCF, not for the security aspect, but it's for the license. Like there are certain software that you cannot include in a license that, if, for example, is Apache and they're using something that is not compatible. So you can see here, they're proving that the software that they're including KubeArmor is Apache 2. I think it's Apache, but they're compatible. BSD, Apache, and continue. But they also give you an evaluation. I was thinking what Scott was mentioning, just to add what Scott as some companies, they go by taking a technology like this, but they choose to go with a vendor that gives them support for this. Because why? Because they're in charge of making sure the license is a kind of easy one because it's NCF, but they're making sure that there's a CVE or day zero exploit on any of these Go packages. They make sure that they have an SLA that they can give you a build as soon as possible, right? On that. So that's sometimes like why people choose that. And also sometimes a vendor will have a FIPS compatible binary. Some in open source, FIPS is optional, but if some companies are maintaining a project, usually that's an easy thing to do for them to get some business, right? Have a FIPS offering, consultancy offering around the project. So that could be another evaluation item when choosing open source versus a vendor supported project.
absolutely.
Thank you, Alan, for your question. Jack?
Okay, so I'm looking for best practices for workflows. So I'm a vendor. I'm delivering a point release to my customer's cluster that is KubeArmor managed. And my point release, my developers have made a minor change, supposedly minor change, that trips some KubeArmor rule that my developers don't know about.
Yep.
What is the normal process? This is a sort of a staging process, right? You deliver, you do a staging, and I imagine there's a step where you verify that whatever you're coming in still plays nice with the existing KubeArmor setup, and communicating to the vendor their actual KubeArmor requirements. Is there a best practice on that? Is this a familiar problem to use? This is something I've had to deal with, not with KubeArmor, but with other security models, where I don't know what the security requirements are until I break them.
Yeah, same thing even in the old firewall days too, right? Jack? I mean, you
Oh
just
yeah,
never
okay,
know.
yeah,
I mean,
okay.
suddenly, a new port's there and you don't know. What I used to do in checkpoint days is I look at the logs, right, and just say, oh, there's a new red. And then I kind of know. Hopefully get the list. But you're right. What if they change a binary name, right? What if they add a
Yep.
binary, remove? Now your KubeArmor is going to say, and the thing doesn't run. First of all, the logs will help you. You should always do it in dev, right? Obviously.
Well,
And then
no,
make sure
but I'm a developer. I'm delivering it to a customer. I'm delivering to a customer. I
Oh,
don't
so
have
you're
the
doing
customer.
it.
I have a Helm chart. I'm delivering a package, right? So I don't have requirements all written down. I didn't get the entire KubeArmor script that I could run in my, because for security purposes, right? I was wondering if this was a familiar. I'm not talking about a developer in a company delivering
Oh.
to a CI/CD chain in their own company. I'm talking about I got a Helm chart and I'm just doing a point release, and I don't know that I accidentally broke some KubeArmor rule.
That is a good question.
If there's no answer, it's okay. I don't want to dwell on it. It's just
There's
it's a
not.
familiar problem that
Yeah.
vendors have. It's a
There's
familiar
not.
problem that vendors have.
My only, the thing is to have a conversation of like, you're not breaking KubeArmor rules or anything like that. It's Linux, right? They have some Linux security posture that they're following. KubeArmor happens to configure the syntax in here that you see in my screen, right?
Yes,
It
yes.
happens to create that. So my advice as like a good solutions architect, the answer is, who wants to guess? It depends.
Oh no, my
So
customers have a staging area.
yeah,
And
but
I
the
plug
thing
into the
that I would
staging area,
say,
and I make it a planned step to verify that we
yeah,
didn't break any KubeArmor rules. I was just fishing for best practices. That's all.
yeah. The thing I can tell you is what I have done in other environments, right? It could be KubeArmor, or it could be Gatekeeper, or it could be Kubernetes, right? That customer can come back saying, "Hey, your latest software doesn't run. Why it doesn't run? Or your latest software is giving us audit messages." What I've seen in that environment, I can just give you an answer for me is a vendor will ask me, Carlos, can you give me the policies that you have in your cluster so I can put those policies in my CI/CD pipeline so I can catch that, and next week when the developer changed the name of the binary, or the binary starts reading files from /etc/foobar, you can catch it on your environment before
Right.
you deliver me the software. So it's about sharing the policies. And on projects like this, KubeArmor, Falco, Policy, KubeArmor is YAML files that are deployed with GitOps, right? So it's a matter of like that link, that contract, instead of being like, I'll give you a PDF of the etc files that you can have. You told me that your binary was going to make name like this. Please don't change it. If you have a contract and the contract becomes just a folder with YAML files, Kubernetes YAML files that you deploy in your dev cluster, that becomes a faster way of producing software and consuming software. That's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Me, Carlos, being like a CI/CD.
No, thank you very
nerd.
much. Noted. Thank you very much.
Good question though, Jay. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like I said, we have some interesting.
But that's the value,
conversation.
right? That people miss. Like that's the value. Like imagine if they're giving you this syntax, right? The Armor syntax. It wouldn't be better to give you the syntax of Armor, and then Armor is the DSL that is very generic.
Yeah, no, I've got customers who say that I will never see that for security reasons. I will never see it.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
that
too.
yeah. But they can tell you, right, and you can yeah. So they have to give you some. They can give you the error, right, about out of the fact, and then you say, okay, I'm going to create my own Armor policy, right, and then put it in my dev cluster to avoid that in the future. Going forward, so I just wanted to show this. I don't know how I can show this bigger, but this is I think this is, we can end with this. This is the value add, right? You could choose to write KubeArmor, like this syntax, right, Scott, is KubeArmor syntax.
Yep.
So you can choose to do these policies and maintain them and write them in this form, and then a couple for BSD or LSM, like all these LSM things. Or you can go like the next level, I think it's the value add, is start writing them like this, Kubernetes APIs, where you have your API version, you have your kind, you have your spec. So you now do start using Kubernetes tools to parse this YAML, right? Validate, syntax check against the CRD, making sure that you can deploy them in dev, stage, and production. You can wrap them in Helm charts, right? Or customize. So now you're working with Kubernetes lingo, right? DSL, then that gets translated into Linux rules, right?
Yep. And like you said, that's and if you saw the KubeArmor policy before that, Carlos, it even had at the top a remark that said managed by KubeArmor.
Yep.
It's telling you, hey, yeah, KubeArmor created this for you. This would be the equivalent of what you would have had to have written. right? And yeah, sure, you can do that, but they can get very complex and tedious, right? And trying to update them.
And that's what Kubernetes control is doing, right? Taking the daemon set running that Linux VM or machine is taking the KubeArmor CR and converting them into files and loading them into the Linux system, right?
Yep.
So it's the automation around that. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
it
Scott.
makes
I
it a
think
really
you
long name if you look up the directory because it has a namespace name, what it's controlling. I have some examples. I mean, the bin example is pretty straightforward one. My favorite is still the Vault one, and we do that as an exercise in this chapter. We redeploy Vault, and we lock down the Vault secret in the file system in the container to where only Nginx can read that secret. So if somebody tries to exec into your container and cat that secret, access denied. Right?
Is this the policy for that example? I was reading the example.
I'm on my laptop only, so that is the external secret one. So that's why we're telling you only Nginx can read it. You'll even see that in the path is user sbin Nginx. So we show it two ways. You do it without that, and you can cat it, and then you deploy the policy. Then you try to cat it again, and it's going to tell you permission denied. It's one of my favorite use cases to tell people because as we mentioned in the secrets chapter a couple weeks ago, so many people think it's in Vault, it's secure. No, it is because it's in Vault, but once it's in that container, it's just a file.
So the next level is this policy. What it's saying at the bottom here is, and you can correct me, is saying like a process, right, that got started by this executable with this path, right? Because sometimes we say Nginx, but it's not any process that the last file name is like the whole path, right? It's not sbin, it's not /Carlos/Nginx. Is this executable on this path can only be allowed to do X and Y, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is this
exactly.
the action is allowed? So the file is like these are the rule sets, and then what is you can put. But what's the difference between this action at the bottom and then this action at every instance of this file?
Because we're going to say that to block those. So if you're trying to get to Etsy secrets, but if you're the process down here that matches, it's going to then allow all the action. So it's almost like a block, or block or disallow or deny.
So the action allow is the default for things that are not specified at the top.
Yeah, so if you're going in here, I wouldn't say default action. You have to, it's part of the process, the match, and then it says action is going to be to allow if you're from user sbin Nginx. I'm probably not describing that correctly, but hopefully that makes some sense.
So the action is related to the process, right? And then it's saying, I think that the most important thing is this one, right? /Etsy/secrets. The action is block.
Yeah, because we're blocking the entire directory on that one.
But allowing Nginx to read it?
Allowing Nginx, yep. So what you'll see in the example case is it's a really stupid web page. It just says it lists your secret, like username, password.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, so when you see a refresh on Nginx, you'll still see it working. If you pull up I'm going to say the ASCII console that they give you from KubeArmor,
you'd actually at the bottom, I saw it.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice thing to watch because you get to see it in real time. Yeah, so like this could tell you, it'll say passed. It'll say if it was blocked. I use this a lot. It kind of goes to what Jack was asking in a way. I use this when something's not working, right? It's like, hey, wait a minute, what did I miss? And you can kind of watch this in real time by putting in the namespace name in that. Now, of course, if you go full,
this is cool.
Yeah.
And this is a CLI that connects to where does this CLI connects to? Does it connect to the controller or does it connect to a specific one of the node agents?
Because it's doing the namespace, it's going to be connecting to, I believe it's going to be the relay to get the information because it's really spitting out the output from what's being attempted.
I see. So this is presenting you the information all the information that the relay is getting from all the agents.
Depending where you tell it to look, yes, because you can say whole cluster, you can say namespace, you can even do labels, right? Because obviously in a big cluster, this would get really busy really fast. So you can tell it only do this namespace.
Yeah, Yeah,
Now
and
in the
that's
full
the example.
version, like if you buy the enterprise, like Alan was asking, it's different. You get a bigger, obviously UI, pretty standard for open source versus a pay, right? You usually get some CLI in open source, and then you got to pay to get the big GUI for the UI.
Francisco has a question. Francisco, you have a question about the example, the understood correctly, the vault example, for instance, you can debug an issue in a container and guarantee that secrets are not accessed. Oh, that's a good one, right, Scott?
Yes, yes. So if you're
Like
asking,
if I'm doing kubectl exec
mhm,
or debug into the nginx to debug something, you cannot just go to Etsy, right, to that folder and see the
right,
secrets that are mounted from Vault,
right,
right?
yep, yep,
So you have to be a little bit smarter, right? Like renaming the nginx binary to your binary shell script that you call it nginx, and then
yes.
reading it there, right?
Yeah,
Um,
there definitely could be some possible ways. Now we could lock it down even more though, right, Carlos? So maybe we block CP. You know, we're going to give you no way to possibly even try to move that.
okay, can I block that no one could write to the binary nginx to be able to rename it or put something on top
Yep,
of it, right?
you could. You definitely could. You
Okay,
could make that. You say it's always going to be read only, right?
okay.
So you couldn't even
This is
possibly
fun,
move it
right? That's the fun part of security, right? Looking into all these layers of security.
or
Is
methods
that
that people
understood,
might try. Yeah,
Francisco? Thank you for bringing up the use case.
absolutely.
Great
Perfect
use
one.
case, right? Like, it's not, you're providing here an example of how the technology works, right? Don't take it as like now no one can read that folder, right? If I use the Scott's policy from the book, right? We are secure with nginx. um,
Yep, yep.
and
Alan,
then the last
um,
section, yeah, is this one the recommend, like a lot of people may not know where to start or what are the number of policies they should put. Is this something that the KubeArmor is able to query these systems and get policies injected?
it won't give you the policy, but it'll tell you. I think I have an output in one of them. That's where I show it, and it even says MITRE in the output. I know I did it one time. I don't know if I took it out of the book though before we published it. No, this one is, yeah. So this is one of the recommends, right? Sorry, my
Found
screen not at
outdated
home.
version of policy templates. Policy templates is referring to.
Yeah, so you see here, what it did is it created a bunch of those policies.
Yeah, these
So
policies,
yeah,
right?
yes, yeah. So being based on now, it breaks them down to a very minute level, as you can see in here, right? So even exec copy services, message of the day. Yeah, I mean, you might want to merge them into one, but it's going to take each one, and then you can apply them. So
But
it's kind
they're
of
coming from
nice.
these systems, or they're probably available from CIS, publish these templates, and they're free?
What it
Or
actually
some of them
does
are.
is it finds all the processes and says, okay, we're going to lock this down. It doesn't actually pull them from anywhere. It's creating those that you saw dynamically.
So what does this comes into play? Mitre and CIS. What do they do? Why
Well, so
they're here?
if you go over to the Git on there, I don't know if you can pull that up.
I think
Carlos.
I was looking at here.
In the meantime,
I think I have
Alan,
the.
because I know we're running late.
It's a quick. If it's a long question, we
No,
can
no.
talk offline. But
Go ahead.
can KubeArmor get out of sync with the LSM? Like if I go create LSM policies directly, does KubeArmor know how to sync that up, or is it going to just stay?
Wow, I've never worked backwards.
Okay. All
That's a
right.
good question. I'm going to have to try that. So
Yeah.
you mean,
On
so
what?
you've
What
done the
was the
policy.
question?
If I follow it right on, you're saying, so we made a KubeArmor policy, it created the LSM. Somebody goes into the host, modifies the LSM directly.
Or creates a new one that's protecting something
Yeah,
completely
that's in.
different.
I'm
Yeah,
going to guess it doesn't have a two-way
probably.
sync,
Yeah,
but
because it could be that you have nodes that come out of the box with 10 policies, and then the next team deploys KubeArmor and put the other
Yeah.
20 policies on top. So you want to have both. I think that's why in the book they put like to know which one came from KubeArmor, have the message at the top, right? This was generated by KubeArmor, but KubeArmor, I would think it would be a bad thing if it just randomly like removes a policy that I intended to have in that one machine, right? That is connected to the um, nuclear machine through a Ethernet cable, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking if you modified an existing one, like one that KubeArmor did create, I want to say what's going to happen is KubeArmor is going to overwrite that because, of
Yeah,
course, it
yeah,
has the
that
declaration.
makes sense.
But I can't say I've tested it.
Hmm.
I love these kind of conversations though, because I can say, "Wow, I've never thought about
Right.
trying that," right? Because I just assume no one's going to get on my host. You know, obviously people
Yeah,
could, right?
reconciling, right? Like the promise of Kubernetes controllers is that the desired state, if somebody changes that KubeArmor generated policy, right, messes with that KubeArmor on the next tick of the, well, I'm expressing like how all Kubernetes controllers work, right? On the next tick, it will go and change it back, and it depends how you route your Go code, right? If you have a lot of Go controllers, Kubernetes controllers have, they add this extra like timer that says, hey, by the way, go to the desired state um, every 1 minute or every 10 hours or every 2 hours and reconcile again, trigger the reconciliation, right? The
So
normal
use it.
reconciliation
Yeah.
happens when you etcd changes, right? The informer will tell your Go controller to change, but not necessarily when you the desired state change, right? There's usually how fast, how many processors do you want to use to change that. So it's a good question for KubeArmor to dig down into if it does reconciliation back.
Yeah, I like the idea. I'm going to test it, and I do, Alan. If you want, I can get you answers for that. I meet with them actually on a weekly basis. We just talk technology and where products should go. Great group of people to talk to. It's one reason why I did write the chapter because I liked how they attacked and approached this
Yeah.
stuff.
Is that their community call or separate from their community
It's
call?
actually a personal one I have with them.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. If you want to talk more about this, like I
Appreciate
said,
it.
one of these topics that I really do like.
Thanks.
And do they have community calls? Do you know if the open source project has, Scott?
I'll
I
find
saw
out.
on their GitHub they had uh, I don't think it was bi-weekly but it said they had weekly calls or maybe bi-weekly.
Yeah, I know they had something because the person who runs it I've spoken to as well. Let's see here. Yeah, so if they do have one, if they do, I really I couldn't stress enough that you'll get some great discussions on that. You know, get some people on that call like Rahul, who's on the list that Carlos pulled up. Just love talking to these people, right? Makes me feel dumb when I'm on calls with them, which I love, because the stuff they can talk about, I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I think we're out of time, but yeah, I want to thank Mark and Scott for joining us this week. Again, the meetup is about like learning and asking questions from Scott. Right? These chapters are too long to cover in 1 hour every aspect of it. But if you follow, the good thing is great about this book is that there's a GitHub repo and then there's exercises, right? That you can practice this, and the fact that they got it working on a kind cluster with a Ubuntu VM, which I in the Slack channel I put information if you want to create a VM. I have a Mac ARM, so I was having trouble. So I use Lima VM. It's a CNCF project. Lima went 1.0 this week, I think, with Container 2.0. You can use Lima to create a VM with QEMU AMD64. So we give you a Linux x86. And then you can execute the scripts from the book and they work out of the box. I've been testing them with the same version of Ubuntu. So it's just Ubuntu, but it needs to be x86. That's the thing to be aware. But the examples work for the ones that I have tried so far. So give it a try. This is a space that are very interesting. I didn't know the details about KubeArmor. I knew about Armor, but and eBPF and Falco, which Falco was included in the CKS also, but I didn't know about KubeArmor. So this is great that this was included
One
in
of the
this
coolest
edition of
things
the book.
on this chapter, Carlos, was the vendor liked it so much that some of their people said, I wish we had this for our documentation.